Level 1, the applicant. You fill out the form on a Tuesday. 37 pages. Medical history, academic transcripts, 3 letters of recommendation, a personal statement the instructions call concise that you've rewritten 9 times. You hit submit. The confirmation email arrives in 4 seconds. It says NASA will contact qualified candidates within 18 months. You close your laptop and go back to your regular life. Most people who apply never hear back. Over 8,000 people submitted applications in the last cycle. NASA selected 10. You do that math in the dark at 2 a.m. You do it more than once. You are not someone who watched a rocket launch on television and decided to reach for something. That is not who gets this far. You hold a doctorate in biomedical engineering, or you've logged 1,000 hours in high-performance military aircraft, or you've spent 3 years operating a submersible on the floor of the Pacific. Every exam you stayed awake for, every certification you pushed through, every paper you survived peer review on was preparation for a form you filled out on a Tuesday afternoon without knowing it. The call comes. They want you in Houston for interviews. There are 120 of you in the first group. Test pilots with dense flight logs and flat expressions. Surgeons who've operated in remote field conditions. Marine biologists. Nuclear engineers. Combat veterans with advanced degrees. These are not ordinary people. Every single one of them is sitting in the same room as you, competing for the same 10 seats. The week of assessments tests whether you break in the right ways. Physical evaluations, psychological panels, interviews with active astronauts and flight surgeons and senior NASA staff. They already know you are capable. What they want to know is whether you can function under sustained isolation, physical degradation, interrupted sleep, and the slow erosion of normal human rhythms over months in an environment your body was never designed to inhabit. You get the second call. You've been selected. It comes on a Wednesday. You hang up and stand in your kitchen and feel something without a clean name. Not joy exactly. More like the moment just before something very large and irreversible begins. Level 2, the astronaut candidate. Astronaut candidate. ASCAN. You wear that title for 2 years before it means anything beyond a government form. You report to Johnson Space Center in Houston. The campus is flat and beige and smells like jet fuel and industrial air conditioning. Your office is a shared desk. The other ASCANs at adjacent desks are all, to varying degrees, just as uncertain about what comes next as you are. That uncertainty is briefly the one thing you share. The first months are classroom instruction. Russian language, because the Soyuz remains the emergency return vehicle on the International Space Station and the manual doesn't pause for translators. You spend mornings conjugating verbs in a different alphabet and afternoons learning the systems architecture of a station that took 30 countries and 15 years to assemble. The systems briefings don't stop: electrical, life support, thermal control, water recovery, oxygen generation, docking interfaces, robotic arm operations, emergency procedures for every failure mode the engineers anticipated and several they didn't. T-38 jet training runs alongside it. If you're not already a pilot, you learn to fly supersonic aircraft. If you are a pilot, you fly more hours in more demanding conditions. The jet isn't preparation for flying in space. It's a tool for building the cognitive and physiological baseline the evaluators need: spatial disorientation management, hypoxia awareness, rapid decision-making at the edge of physical tolerance. You train for spacewalks in the Neutral Buoyancy Lab, a pool holding 6.2 million gallons of water and a full-scale replica of the ISS. 6 hours underwater for every 1 hour outside the actual station. The suit weighs 280 pounds on land and takes 2 technicians 45 minutes to seal around you. Underwater it achieves neutral buoyancy, which is close enough to microgravity that it teaches you the one thing this work requires above everything else: deliberate patience. Rushing, in space, ends you. Survival training. A week in Maine in winter learning emergency land landing procedures. Days in a raft on the Gulf of Mexico in August, simulating a water landing. The sun off that water is a physical weight. You burn in places you didn't know were exposed. 2 years after you arrived at JSC, you graduate. Small ceremony. Your family attends. They hand you a silver pin, the candidate pin, not the gold one that comes later, and you understand that you have only just arrived at the start of something. Level 3, the unassigned astronaut. You have the pin. You do not have a flight assignment. The average wait between completing astronaut candidate training and receiving a mission is somewhere between 3 and 10 years. Some astronauts wait longer. Some never fly at all. This part doesn't appear in the recruitment materials. You fill the years with real work. You're assigned as Capcom, Capsule Communicator, in Mission Control. During active missions, you are the voice the crew hears from the ground. Astronauts talk to you because they trust someone who understands the experience to translate between what's happening in orbit and what the engineering teams need to know. You sit the console for long shifts across active missions and learn how the ground-to-orbit relationship actually functions. Slower, more layered, and more human than any procedure document suggests. You support spacewalk training in the NBL. You work in the astronaut office reviewing hardware. You travel to Russia and train on the Soyuz at the Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center outside Moscow. Broad corridors, portraits of cosmonauts on every wall, an engineering culture so deeply embedded in the building that you feel it before anyone explains it. Your Russian is functional. The cosmonauts appreciate the attempt even when the pronunciation earns a reaction. You write procedures. You review incident reports from the station. You give technical briefings to visiting scientists. You do everything except leave the atmosphere. Then your section chief closes the office door. There is a mission. A 6-month rotation to the ISS. They want you as mission specialist. Launch in 14 months. You say yes. The waiting is over. Level 4, the mission specialist. 14 months of mission-specific training and it does not pause. Your launch vehicle is a Crew Dragon. You train at the Cape and at SpaceX facilities in California. The vehicle is different from the Soyuz in nearly every way except the essential one. It sits on a controlled explosion and you have to trust the math. You memorize emergency procedures until execution requires no thought. You train your specific research assignments: fluid dynamics, protein crystal growth, cardiac tissue behavior in microgravity, bone density under radiation exposure. You spend time with the principal investigators at university labs, because you will be their hands in orbit, and hands that don't understand the objective make errors that cost years. You train 6 planned spacewalks, 3 hours daily in the pool. You can close your eyes and trace the route from the Quest airlock to your first EVA worksite by memory, routing around the solar array mounts, past the thermal insulation panels, to the specific bolt assembly you'll remove with a specific torque value and a specific backup if the primary tool binds. Launch day. You're up at 3 a.m. in crew quarters at the Cape. The flight surgeon checks vitals. You eat. You put on the orange launch-in entry suit, which requires time and 2 technicians and patience with hardware that was not designed for dignity. The Astrovan takes you to the pad. The rocket is lit by floodlights from below and generates its own local weather: ice fog spiraling off cryogenic fuel tanks, vapor columns rising in the still air. The photographs don't include the scale. Engines ignite 8 seconds before liftoff. You feel it in your spine before you hear anything. The clamps release and you are moving. Max Q presses you at 3 Gs. Your vision narrows slightly at the edges. 2 minutes 45 seconds up, the first stage cuts out and separates, and there is a silence so complete it takes a moment to process. The upper stage ignites. 9 minutes after leaving the ground, you are in orbit. The engine stops. Everything stops. A pen drifts out of a gap in someone's suit pocket, drifts to the center of the cabin, and stays there. Gravity stopped caring. You look out the window. The Atlantic Ocean is visible from 200 miles up. The curve of the Earth is not a photograph. It is a physical fact directly in front of your face, and your nervous system, trained for 30 years to operate on a flat surface, has no procedure for this. You just look at it. Your first EVA is 4 hours in vacuum on a tether you've triple-checked. The Earth rotates beneath you at 17,500 miles per hour. You are moving with it. The temperature differential between sunlit and shadowed surfaces runs 500 degrees. The suit manages it. You are alive out here because of the suit. 6 months total. Structured, documented, procedurally dense. Your experiments run. Some produce the results the investigators predicted. Some don't, which is what makes them experiments. You eat from pouches. You sleep in a bag velcroed to a wall with no particular relationship to up or down. Your bone density decreases. You spend 2 hours every day on exercise equipment to slow the degradation of muscle mass. Your face puffs slightly from fluid redistribution. Your vision shifts as intracranial pressure adjusts. You track all of it weekly. 6 months later you undock and come home. Re-entry is 3,000 degrees on the heat shield and then parachutes and then the Pacific. The recovery team lifts you from the capsule. Your legs don't function correctly for 3 days. Gravity takes its own kind of readjustment. You sit in a chair on the recovery vessel and put a cup down and it stays where you put it, and for a second this seems worth noting. Level 5, the Expedition Commander. You've flown twice. You know what the station sounds like when it's running correctly and what it sounds like when something is developing wrong. You know which research rack runs warm and why. You know the crew dynamics of long-duration confinement in ways that no classroom gets close to. Now they're sending you back as commander. The ISS Commander is responsible for the station, the crew, and the mission. If the carbon dioxide scrubber fails at 2 a.m. on day 90 and your ground team is 13 seconds behind every communication you send them, the decisions are yours. You don't wait. Your crew is 5 people from 4 countries. You've trained with all of them. You know who accelerates under pressure and who freezes, who asks too many questions and who doesn't ask enough. On day 47, a micrometeorite impact creates a slow air leak in one of the Russian modules, pressure decay of approximately 0.8 millibars per hour. You isolate the module, brief the crew, coordinate with Houston and Moscow simultaneously in 2 languages in the same conversation. The leak is located and patched with a repair kit designed for exactly this. The ground team reacts audibly over the link. You tell them the work isn't finished. One of your crew is struggling. Not technically, he's exceptional there. But the confinement is narrowing him in ways that show first in meal patterns, then in the decreasing frequency of his ground check-ins, then in a series of small withdrawals that are individually explainable and collectively significant. You don't name it publicly. You start working alongside him on tasks that don't require collaboration, giving him room when he needs it and presence when he doesn't ask for it. By month 4, he's steadied. You never formalize what you did. You land on the Kazakh steppe at 3 a.m. after 197 days. The recovery team is there with flashlights and vehicles. The hatch opens and the cold air arrives, and after 7 months of climate-controlled station atmosphere, the smell of open grassland in the dark is one of the more disorienting sensory experiences of your life. Level 6, the Chief Astronaut. Your 3rd mission was a lunar gateway transit. 4 months in lunar orbit. You worked in the shadow of the moon and watched Earth from 240,000 miles out. Not the immersive blue field you see from ISS altitude, but a small discrete object in an enormous darkness that you could cover with your thumb. Something about that doesn't let go. They offer you Chief of the Astronaut Office. You take it. You stop flying. That is the price. You manage roughly 60 active astronauts and a rotating population of Askans. You handle crew assignments, training schedules, hardware evaluation boards, and the constant negotiation between what crews operationally need and what the budget provides. You sit on review boards for new vehicle designs. You brief the NASA administrator on crew readiness. You argue, sometimes at volume, for rest requirements that mission planners treat as preferences. You assign the crew for the first crewed Mars transit. 18 months in deep space, beyond realistic emergency return, beyond real-time communication. Communication delay from Mars ranges from 3 to 22 minutes each way, so a 2-minute exchange takes between 6 and 44 minutes minimum. The crew will be more isolated than any human crew has been before. You know each of them. You know what the mission will take from them. You assign them anyway, because they are the people who can do it, and the mission requires people who can do it. Your daughter comes to your office one afternoon. She's finishing an aerospace engineering degree. She wants to apply to the astronaut program. You look at her across the desk and think about the waiting and the EVACE and the 197-day increment and the crew member you steadied over 4 months and the years you spent in this building doing everything except leaving the atmosphere, and you don't try to talk her out of it. You tell her to finish her degree, log every flight hour she can, and apply. Level 7, the Mission Director. You will not go to Mars. Your job is to get 6 people there and back, from a console in Houston. The mission is an 18-month round trip, 4-month transit outbound, 30 days on the southern highland surface, 7 months back depending on the alignment window. You train for this role with the same depth you once trained to fly. You build contingency procedures for failure modes that have never been tested in this environment. You develop the communication protocol for a crew that must diagnose and resolve any technical anomaly within the round-trip message time, which at peak delay is 44 minutes. In a fast-developing emergency, 44 minutes is not a workable response window. The crew has to be the response. Launch comes on a Wednesday. You are at mission control when the transfer vehicle engine fires toward Mars. The commander's voice comes over the link, carrying the first detectable delay. She reports the vehicle is within parameters. The telemetry confirms it. You tell her the same and begin the wait. On day 214, the crew is on the surface at peak communication delay. 2 solar panels on the habitat are accumulating dust faster than the model predicted. It is not a mission-ending problem, but it has a window. Battery reserves need to hold through the night. Your team composes the guidance transmission, which won't arrive for 22 minutes and won't be actionable for 44. You watch the telemetry in the silence. You sit completely still. They solve it before your message arrives. The commander's response describes exactly the procedure you would have recommended. You lean back. Mission control goes quiet in the way it does when tension resolves without becoming catastrophe. Day 712. The crew splashes down in the Pacific. 6 astronauts lifted from the capsule and seated in reclined chairs on the recovery vessel. They all have the same expression, flat and inward, the look of people who have just lived through something they haven't started to process yet. You know that expression. You wore it once on a recovery ship yourself, watching a pen drift sideways and stay there. Level 8, the NASA Administrator. The Senate confirms you. You run the agency. You have a security detail. A schedule planned weeks in advance. A budget measured in billions and a timeline measured in congressional cycles, which are considerably less predictable than orbital mechanics. You testify twice a year before the Senate Commerce Committee. The senators have varying levels of technical literacy and uniform interest in their state's share of NASA contracts. You learn to explain the human value of exploration in terms that connect to people who have never thought about Mars insertion trajectories and have no desire to start. You get capable at this. It costs something. You manage 17,000 civil servants and a contractor workforce of 40,000 people. Among them are engineers designing habitat radiation shielding for deep space, biologists developing closed-loop life support for multi-year missions, and teams building hardware to manufacture propellant from Martian atmosphere. The work is genuinely hard in ways that don't translate to a budget meeting. The budget meetings are also genuinely hard, in ways that don't translate back. You lose people. A test article accident during a pressure qualification test of a lunar lander ascent stage kills 2 engineers and 1 astronaut serving as a technical observer. The investigation runs 11 months. The findings are unambiguous, a procedural deviation compounded by a testing environment that had absorbed too much normalized risk across too many prior successful tests. You implement every corrective action. You change the protocols and the review board structure. You stand at the memorial and speak about each of the 3 people who died, and you know their work and you mean every word. 3 people are still dead. You keep a card in your desk drawer. Their names are on it. You look at it every morning before the day starts. You serve 6 years. 3 successful crewed Mars missions, 1 lunar abort that becomes a training case study in mission execution, the first permanent Artemis lunar habitat commissioned and occupied, contracts signed for a nuclear propulsion transfer vehicle that won't launch until long after you've left. On your last day, you walk through the Astronaut building at JSC. The hallway photographs run from Mercury to the most recent Mars surface image, 65 years of faces in pressure suits. You know a significant number of those faces. Some are people you trained alongside. Some you trained yourself. Some you will not see again. You leave through the front entrance. No cameras. You get in a car. Level 9, the retired astronaut. The neighborhood is quiet in the mornings. 2 retired NASA engineers live on your street. A former flight director's dog knows your walking schedule. Houston in early spring is warm and carries moisture from the Gulf. You drink coffee on the back porch. Ordinary fence, ordinary bird feeder, ordinary sky cut by rooflines. You sat outside the ISS in a pressure suit and watched the sun rise and set 16 times in 24 hours. You managed 3 crewed Mars missions from a console in Building 30. You ran the agency that returned humans to the moon. None of that is visible in this backyard. The bird feeder is just a bird feeder. Your back gives you problems from the bone density changes across 3 extended missions. Your vision requires glasses, something the flight surgeons tracked over 3 decades. There's an inner ear sensitivity that has been stable for 15 years and will almost certainly stay that way, but you monitor it. 30 years of spaceflight trains you to track your own systems. Former colleagues call. The attrition is quieter than combat, but it compounds. 1 former crew member died of cancer at 52. Another had a stroke at 49. 1 died by his own hand 4 years after retiring, and that one doesn't settle the same way the others do. His daughter was 7 years old. You gave the eulogy. You meant every word, and you still can't account for what he was carrying that he never surfaced. You attend his memorial every year on the date. You bring his daughter flowers now that she's old enough to understand why. In the spring, JSC asks you to speak at an astronaut graduation. 50 people in the audience, 8 of them fresh Askins 2 years into training. They have the particular alertness of people who know they are at the beginning of something enormous. You don't give them a polished address. You tell them the waiting is harder than the flying. You tell them confinement compounds over months in ways that ground simulations only partially prepare you for. You tell them the mission depends more on who you are as a team member than on any individual technical capability. You tell them to maintain their relationships on the ground with the same discipline they give their professional preparation. You tell them to find something that holds them steady on the other side of what the work takes. They listen carefully. They believe the parts that confirm what they already expected. The parts that don't fit yet, they'll file away and find later. You shake their hands at the door. You drive home through Houston's afternoon traffic. The light is ordinary Texas light on an ordinary afternoon. You stop at the grocery store. It took time to stop feeling like a step down from something. Now it's just what a day is. Somewhere tonight, a 26-year-old researcher is at a desk with a 37-page form open on her screen. Doctorate in Biomedical Engineering. 100 hours in a light aircraft because she read that flight experience matters and planned for it 3 years ago. She has no idea what the next 30 years will ask of her. The form doesn't say. The confirmation email won't say. She will either make it or she won't. If she does, she will carry the weight of the work and the years away from people she loves and the knowledge of things that have no equivalent in ordinary conversation. She will float above the curve of the earth in a pressure suit, and there will be a moment, probably brief, that she can't prepare for and won't fully be able to describe afterward. And if she reaches the far end of all of it, she will sit somewhere on an ordinary morning with a cup of coffee, watch the light come up, and try to figure out what it was worth.